Every act counts. Each one of us has the power to affect the world. A prescient quote from Jack Kornfield from episode 281 of Heart Wisdom, The Paradox of Practice, When to Sit, When to Serve. This one is from a Dharma Talk at the Insight Meditation Society on December 7th, 1992, and is all about finding the balance between the individual and universal responsibility. AKA, what is the better spiritual practice? To meditate or to be out there serving? Jack shares both sides, why it's important to do the inner spiritual work. And that wonderful quote that I've heard before, I'm not sure exactly who it goes back to, but don't just do something, sit there. That old spiritual adage, really tongue-in-cheek, but truly something that stops the momentum in our lives so that we can take a intuitive inventory of what is actually going on. Jack calls this the sacred pause. And then there's the opposite side of this. The equal opposite side, and this time for sure, is don't just sit there, we don't have time. And through this lens, Jack shares stories of Joanna Macy, Vimala Thakur, and Ajahn Chah and Mahagosananda, exploring how it's our duty on this earth to steward this environment, to steward each other and a beautiful future. And unless we actually get up and act, we are not going to have a planet or a situation that is safe enough for us to even do the spiritual practice that we're talking about. So in this, Jack helps each one of us find our own unique balance, be able to listen in and feel what is right. And in general, nowadays, as we are for the most part Westerners, and we are for the most part having to be householders unless you're listening in a monastery. So we have to find a way to create an equilibrium in our lives between doing the inner work and then helping tend the outer garden, which is so important because there are so many others walking around this beautiful garden with us, so might as well make it beautiful. Jack shares a story which sums it up so well. He was visiting the beautiful activist Vimala Thakur, who was doing amazing work on the ground, beautiful seva, good service. And he asked her something along the lines of, I see you're doing this service. Is that because this is higher than meditation? And she said, a striking reply, how can you divide meditation and service? As a lover of life, I can make no distinction. I can keep out of no field of life. And that makes me think of Ram Dass's guru, Maharaji Neem Karoli Baba, who is always saying, Sabek, Sabek, all one, we're all one. He says, it's better to see God in everything than to try to figure it out. And I see this in Jack, and just highlighted so well in this quote from Vimala, I can keep out of no field of life. As a lover of life, I make no distinction. So, just a couple bits of housekeeping. Jack's masterclass in interactive guided meditation is sparking back up on April 7th. So if you would like to join in this wonderful online journey to learn how to hold space and guide people to their deepest intuitive wisdom, this is a great opportunity to learn with students and Jack. As always, we have the Year of Awakening going on. This is a year of hangs with Jack and some fresh content each week to keep you focused on awakening for the year. And then on April 7th, we have the Spirit Rock Monday night Dharma Talk live stream. This is a wonderful opportunity to tap into a guided meditation with Jack and to see what he has on his mind and heart, which has been very entertaining and very prescient lately. So I hope you will join us there. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoy this masterful podcast, The Paradox of Practice, When to Sit, When to Serve. So good for this time. Thank you for being here, and thank everyone at Be Here Now Network and on Jack's team for helping us produce this amazing weekly content. May you be happy. May you find balance between meditation and service. May you be protected and healthy. And may your heart be smiling in its pure authenticity. Namaste.
This fall, so far, there's been a series of lectures or Dharma talks for about 10 weeks, focusing on the practice of mindfulness or awareness and various aspects of attention, the breath and body, the heart and mind, attention as one moves and extends life into activity, and then the results of that attention, the transformations that can come through that, following the traditional Buddhist teachings of the foundations of mindfulness. Last week, at the end of that series of 10 talks, there was a question that was raised on the relationship of inner practice and inner freedom to the suffering of the world at large around us. Last week I spoke of the Buddhist teachings of the Four Noble Truths, the teaching of suffering and its cause. Personally, the cause of greed and fear and hatred and confusion, depression, those kind of states in ourselves, attachment. And then worldwide, the cause of human suffering, again, coming from greed and prejudice and hatred, the kind of forces that create war and starvation and so forth. The truth of suffering, the truth of its cause, the truth that peace is possible, freedom, awakening through non-grasping. Then the question comes, how to reconcile the need for response to the sufferings of the world, our responsibility, the kind of service that we might give to the world around us, with the teachings of non-attachment, non-grasping, emptiness that we spoke of. A question for you as we begin to look at that topic. Kind of a reflection for this moment. Are you here in this room? Or is this room in you? It's asked in some other way sometimes. Did you come to Spirit Rock? Or did Spirit Rock come to you? Are you in this room or is this room in you? Can you tell? The reason I ask that is the heart of this question of the relationship of individual and universal responsibility comes down to what is the relationship between what is individual, what is personal, and what is the universe. I recently taught in Sacramento with a teacher and good friend whom I respect very much, Joanna Macy. And Joanna was talking about a trip that she had returned from just this fall. She and Fran were in the former Soviet Union. And they went to visit the area around Chernobyl. And in particular, they went to a city, I can't remember its name, Nova something or others. That was the nearest inhabited city to the reactor at Chernobyl. A city of about 50,000 people, the size of San Rafael, perhaps. And this is the nearest place where people are still living to Chernobyl. And this city is in an area where there's some beautiful rolling mountains. I don't know, maybe they connected some distance to the Caucasus or the Urals or something. And beautiful forests. And the people of this area are people who walked in those forests for generations, for thousands of years, picking mushrooms, cutting wood, going out for picnics, playing, hunting, living in the landscape of that land around them. Now in this Russian city, these 50,000 people have to stay indoors, and there's special seals around their windows and their doors, and they go out for a little bit and they go into a building in which they work. And they have on their walls pictures of the forest. and that's all that they have. So Joanna and Fran did some of what is her great work, this despair and empowerment work. 2 or 3 days together with a number of the community leaders and people from that community, asking people to talk about what had happened and to look at what had happened in their lives. And in the midst of it, she asked the question, when will you be able to go back to your forests? And the mayor of the town said, not in my great-grandchildren's lifetime, not in their great-grandchildren's lifetime. And they began to weep and grieve, as you can imagine, for really the loss of their life. Several people became very angry, quite angry at Joanna, and said, why are you making us do this? Why are you making us feel all of this? Go into all of this. It's hard enough without your coming here. And she sat silently and waited. And someone answered finally. Someone of the group of the Russians there said, so that we can tell our children that we face the truth. So that we can tell our children that we were willing to bear witness to that which they have to live through as well. And someone else said, so that we can be a sentinel to warn all humankind, never again to let this happen to your children, to your communities, so that we can become stewards of this earth. As awakening develops, it's important to distinguish between the true characteristics of enlightenment or opening, as we spoke of last time, and the near enemies. And I've given this teaching here before. The near enemy to love is attachment. Kind of feels like love initially, but you know what it does to love after a while. It separates us and then says, I need this person to be a certain way. The near enemy to true compassion is pity. Oh, that poor person, they suffer. As if we didn't all share great sorrows. The near enemy to joy is competition or comparison. How do we rate compared to someone else? And the near enemy to equanimity is indifference. It feels like equanimity, but it's really a separation, a not caring. Whereas true equanimity is that openness of heart and mind in the midst of all life. The near enemies are anything that keep us separate, that create an us and a them. Freedom or emptiness, which we spoke of last week, is the same as interdependence. As Lama, the great Tibetan Lama Kalu Rinpoche said, we discover that we are nothing, and being nothing, we are everything. That is all. So I was in India with my wife some years ago, visiting and learning from a wonderful teacher, a woman named Vimla Thakar, who's a great meditation master and yogi. She initially was a follower of Gandhi and Vinoba Bhave and did lots of village development work, many kinds. And then she met Krishnamurti, was much taken by the freedom that he taught, deeply moved by that and followed him for a long time, and in fact became herself such a deep she found in herself such a deep and beautiful presence of peace and freedom that Krishnamurti said, you must teach as well. One of the few people that he really asked to do that. So she went around the world for a while teaching wonderful seminars, meditation retreats. Yet I had heard that now, around the time we were coming to visit her, she had given that up and was back doing rural development projects in the villages of India. So Liana and I, my wife and I, went up to be with her in her ashram in Mount Abu, Rajasthan, Gujarat. And after spending a bit of time there, we had a talk with her, and I said, Vimala, I've heard that you're now back doing development work, Gandhian work in the villages. Is that because you found that meditation wasn't enough? That spiritual life is really one-sided and that it's better to go out and do your meditation as service? And she was very insulted. She said, how can you think that? She said, how can you divide them? I am a lover of life, sir, that same kind of sir that Krishnamurti uses. And as a lover of life, sir, I cannot keep out of any area of life. So if I walk through a village in Rajasthan or Gujarat, and people are hungry for not enough food, or they're sick because the wells are shallow and they don't have proper sanitation, how can I but stop and work together so that we can dig deeper wells and find pure water for irrigation and for sanitation? And if I'm in London or Chicago or Los Angeles or wherever, and I see people who are suffering the great pains of loneliness and alienation and despair and confusion that no amount of money can alleviate, how can I but respond to that suffering? How can I not respond and teach what it means to be free? She said, as a lover of life, I can make no distinction. I can stay out of no field of life. Do we in our lives divide what is sacred from what is not? What is spiritual from what's not spiritual? We've been taught that. Do we still do it? As Rumi says, sometimes we put the saddlebags on Jesus and let the donkey run loose in the pasture. We get it backwards, pray a little bit and forget where it is that we have to really pay attention. Now there is this kind of paradox, one side of which is the quality that Castaneda calls controlled folly, this empty dance. All paths lead out of the bush and back into the bush. We're not really going anywhere. It's that perspective that knows that it is like a rainbow, an echo, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud. Our life goes like that, a phantom, a dream. And that if we look on the earth from some distance, climb way up in the mountains and look down at the ant people who are going places feeling very important, in their cars or wherever they are, or even out in space and realize, a million years here or there's nothing on the earth. It's nothing. So that's one side. It's just a dance. And on the other is the quality of care or impeccability, because it is only here in this form once, in this way, only one time. It is incredibly precious. And what matters is to recognize that we don't have time and that every act counts. Even the small ones. If one is to do good, says William Blake, it must be done in the minute particulars. General good is the plea of the hypocrite, the flatterer, and the scoundrel. So this paradox, what to do? The emptiness of it and the preciousness of it. The stillness, the listening, the openness that comes from meditation can inform our action. And in a way, we can make a case for both sides of this paradox. One side of it could be expressed in the saying, don't just do something, sit there. The first rule of Hippocrates in medicine, which a lot of people may have forgotten at certain times in their medical doings, is do no harm. It's a great rule on this earth. Do no harm. Don't just do something, sit there. There have been 28 civilizations that we know that are in recorded history, probably many before that, but the Babylonian and the Assyrian and the great, the Grecian and the Roman and the great Chinese and the Mayan, Aztec civilization and so forth. They come and they go in this world. Cycles. Countless eons of cycling. If you pay attention, you begin to notice that the people who go out and try and make a difference politically, fight for something or other, the way the civilization cycles seem to be, one regime replaces another. And sometimes they're better and sometimes they're worse. And a lot of times the people who fight for things, when they get in power, what happens? They do the same bad things themselves. And it happens over and over and over. How many revolutions do we know this century that haven't turned sour? Not very many. So you look at all the political needs and the kind of political economic transformation, and if you don't pay attention to the greed and the hatred and the prejudice that underlies them, they simply get repeated in another form over and over and over again. So that the only way that freedom, justice, goodness can come to human beings is not by political or economic change. It never works. But by the transformation of the heart. When someone learns how to be unafraid in the face of anger or fear, learns how to work with their own greed and desire, then perhaps something useful can come to the world. And without that, it's just empty. So one of the greatest political acts you can do is to do nothing and face yourself. People are unwilling to do that. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? On the other hand, today on this earth, there are millions of people, even millions of children, who are hungry, who don't have enough food in their bellies. There are millions of homeless people, not just in India or Africa or Central America, but in Marin and San Francisco and Los Angeles and elsewhere, in the rainstorms where it's cold, who are homeless. We are still spending $10 million a minute on weapons and military things worldwide. $10 million a minute. It's obscene in the face of that hunger. There's a ship that left a harbor in France about a month ago, the first one ever, sailing for Japan, carrying a cargo of several metric tons of powdered plutonium for reprocessing in Japan. And there was a whole little world dance about whether this was going to happen. First of all, plutonium can be used, if anybody gets any, to build nuclear weapons, many, many more of them. But that's not the big problem, believe it or not. This is the first of a whole series of shipments. Powdered plutonium is one of the most poisonous, toxic substances ever imagined. It lasts for 250,000 years. If something should happen to that ship, it's only halfway there. It could poison a whole ocean. So if you want to pray during the season, you might pray for the captain of that ship and the crew of that ship, that they hold what has been entrusted to them with impeccability and with care, because it really matters. The cattle in southern Chile are going blind because of the hole in the ozone layer, and lots of the wild animals in the southern Andes And we're still kind of studying whether we should do something about CFCs or not. It might affect our economy a little bit. You don't even want to send your children out to play in New Zealand or southern South America because of the radiation. So the other side of this is don't just sit there. There isn't time. How do we choose? We've talked about spiritual practice as a path with heart. How do we follow that path with heart? We must sense inside that each of these perspectives has the power to affect the world, and that each one of us has the power to affect the world. I believe that the yogis who live in the caves in India and Nepal and Tibet and the Himalayas, and they're still there, and I've met some, who spend a lifetime generating compassion in silence for the world, or the ones in monasteries in Europe, Mount Athos or wherever, I believe they have a great effect on all of us. Just like the story I told have told before when we were on Mount Abu in India, Liana and I, and she had a vision of her brother coming to her and of him dying, and it was just the day, in just the way that he died. How could that be halfway around the world? It is so, and you've all heard those stories many times. It is so because we are not separate. So that when I lived at Ajahn Chah's monastery in the province of Ubon, beautiful old forest, great big tropical forest trees, we were not far from the border of Laos and Cambodia. You'd watch the bombers go overhead from the big air bases in the Vietnam War. And then at night, you'd see the flashes of the bombs in Laos and Cambodia. Could really hear it and see it, feel it. So friends came to visit who were involved in the Quaker peace work in Vietnam and Laos. And they said, how can you just be here in this monastery during the war? If you've never been to a place in war, it is horrible. And people go absolutely berserk. Even relatively good people go crazy a lot of the time. There's very little sanity left. What was interesting is some of these friends came to visit, and after a while being there, they were renewed and refreshed and ready to go back. And they saw what I had seen, that this monastery, by not getting involved in the politics and the war around, became a sanctuary, an island of peace, a living library, 200 acres, several hundred people. You could go in that monastery and lose your wallet, drop a piece of gold. Someone would pick it up and save it for you. It was a place where people could come and learn what it meant to care for one another and respect each other, to live in the same way. That monastery kept alive something that the whole area desperately needed. Sometimes during the war, as I said, during the Iraq-Kuwait war, one of the most radical things you can do is put on Mozart instead of the news. And sometimes what matters most is teaching one child what it means to love the world. I have a good friend who I talk about in various Dharma talks often, a Cambodian monk named Mahagosananda, who's sort of become the Gandhi of Cambodia. And I've known him for 25 years. He was a scholar for 40 years. He studied in Cambodia, and then he went to India and lived at Nalanda University in Bodh Gaya. Speaks 15 languages: Pali, Sanskrit, French, Cambodian, Lao, Thai, English, Hindi, Urdu. Wonderful. Loves to read the Buddhist texts. And he was a sweet, mild-mannered translator, and not even all that much of a meditator. A scholar, when I knew him, who would come to live in some forest monasteries and help translate for Western monks. But when all of the sorrows happened in Cambodia, he became one of the few senior monks still alive. And he began to open temples that I've talked about in other nights in the Cambodian refugee camps. And something happened from those 40 years of studying texts and living a simple life and nourishing himself on the Dharma. Something blossomed in him where he walked in the middle of just the most terrible situations and became a beacon of light. He would go through the refugee camps handing out in Cambodian this one-page text of the Buddhist Sutra on Loving Kindness. He had 100,000 of them printed up and just walked everywhere giving that out and chanting to people. And people's faces would either weep or light up with joy when they saw him. But you wouldn't have known it when you first met him. It was like he was in this cocoon just studying for these years. This year he walked on foot from the Thai border camps all the way to Phnom Penh with a whole group of people in a peace march across Cambodia. One child can become that. Friend John Kabat-Zinn, who's worked in a medical school using Vipassana and insight meditation for healing pain and physical suffering, now has a program that was successful enough at University of Massachusetts and at Harvard. He got a big grant. He has a program working in the inner city. And so he has these taxis that go out that are paid for by this government grant and pick up people who are on welfare and disability and have very, very little money. Taxis pick them up, drive them to the medical school, and they have several hours of meditation instruction, and then they go back home, paid for by the government, the Department of Meditation. Or Tetsugen Sensei, this friend in New York who is a Zen master whose community is really service-oriented, works a lot with homeless people and had this homeless retreat last year where a group of students went and lived 5 days out in the streets in New York City and sat on park benches doing their meditation twice a day in the park benches in the city, and then they had to find homeless shelters. 5 days, you had $5. That was the money you were allotted, and you had to go and find a place to sleep and food to eat, to learn really what it meant to be homeless so that one could serve. A good friend who is a psychologist the chief psychologist for Weight Watchers in this country, 1 million people involved in Weight Watchers, who started Dieters Feed the Hungry. This organization, when you save yourself from eating all this food, you take the money you would have bought for that food and you buy food and you give it to people who are hungry. And now they're doing this whole thing across the country, Dieters Feed the Hungry. From Daniel Berrigan, sometime in your life, hope that you might see one starved man, the look on his face when the bread finally arrives. Hope that you might have baked it, or bought it, or even kneaded it yourself. For that look on his face, for your meeting his eyes across a piece of bread, you might be willing to lose a lot, or suffer a lot, or die a little. So many ways. It's said in Zen, there are only two things. You sit and you sweep the garden. And it doesn't matter how big the garden is. Which and when? To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the stars, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to reap, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Everything in our life has its cycles. Practice, says Ram Dass, spiritual life is a bit like a roller coaster. Each new height is usually followed by a new low. Understanding this makes it a bit easier to ride through the phases. There is, in addition to the up and down cycles, an in and out cycle. That is, there are stages at which you feel pulled into inner work, And all you seek is a quiet place to meditate and get on with it. And then there are times when you turn outward and seek to be involved in the marketplace. Both of these parts of the cycle are part of one's practice. For what happens to you in the marketplace helps in your meditation. And what happens in meditation helps you to participate in the marketplace without attachment. Each has its cycles. What cycle are we in? There's this great human cycle of contemplation and restoration, of freeing oneself, and then bringing that gift back into the world. What is your cycle now? Where are you? Really listen. Each has its time in our life.